And you've just heard The Silky of Soul Skerry by Chloe Matharu. And I'm delighted to be joined by Chloe now. Hello, Chloe.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So first of all, what can you tell us about The Silky of Soul Skerry?
Yeah, so this is a Scots traditional ballad. It's actually Orcadian, and my version of it is an electronic soundscape. I've actually collaborated with Tombkeeper Productions, and they're actually a Glasgow-based production company. And we worked on this to include seal song, sea spray, field recordings, sounds of the sea, along with electronic elements. Um, Also, it's being released on the 28th of July, so that's my Cambridge Folk Festival debut, where I'm performing for the first time since I was in a kind of youth band. And we went as a kind of youth, there was a collection of us from school that all went under Bella Hardy's tutorage, and then we did a kind of concert at Cambridge Folk Festival. So that's pushing about 12 years now since that. So I'll be back in Cambridge Folk Festival this Friday, the 28th of July, essentially to release this single, which I'm really excited about.
And for those that don't know, Cambridge Folk Festival is a big deal, isn't it? It's one of the bigger folk festivals.
Yeah, I think in my mind, it seems to me like the mecca of folk in the UK, especially English folk. So I'm really pleased to be included.
Almost the Glastonbury of folk music.
Yeah, definitely.
And you mentioned field recordings there, and I think some people might not know what that means. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's sounds of the natural world that we've caught essentially and embedded in the track. And my aim through music essentially is to have this presence of the natural elements in the music. I really am so inspired by the outdoors and my time at sea in the Merchant Navy as a navigational officer, and just be isolated from land and people on ship and being completely exposed to the elements has made me really respect that energy. And I try and include this into my recordings. So also in my recent album, Small Voyages, we included a lot of field recordings in that as well. And that was for the sole aim of trying to get landlubbers to experience what life is like at sea through this album of songs that I'd written about my time at sea. And I think that's what really caught my imagination for The Silky of Soul Skerry, because I know that it's a well-known Scottish ballad, and a lot of people have done versions of this song, but the tale never gets old. The idea of a mythical creature that lives on land as a man or a woman and then disappears into the sea for years is really quite somehow reflective of a seafarer's life. And I think just as a seafarer, that really caught my imagination for this track.
I noticed that in your biography that's what you had done. Worked for the Navy, Merchant Navy, and there's a long tradition of kind of maritime folk music. So that obviously has fed into your own music.
Yeah, I think in the UK, there's been quite an emphasis to date on sea shanties and essentially men singing in a lot of the stories about male seafarers. And I think my point of view is to lend a voice to the modern day seafarer in the sense of a female perspective. And I just want to rewrite that kind of maritime folk in my own way. And it's from first-hand experience. I know that back in the day, a lot of folk singers, very well-respected folk singers, also had jobs. And so they were really able to write from first-hand experience some kind of social narrative about working conditions and, political messages. And I think from my point of view, this is my own small way of essentially writing a first-hand experience or commentary of life at sea as a female seafarer.
Yeah, because that's where a lot of the folk music came from, wasn't it? People singing about their work, or maybe even to help them get through their work.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I really found at sea, just because I had this history with music before I went to sea, you couldn't get away from the sounds and the rhythms of the ship, this constant noise all around you. And somehow, I mean, I wasn't planning to write songs whilst I was at sea. I mean, I was exceptionally busy and it's tiring work, but I ended up writing quite a few songs whilst at sea. And I left sea with a big notebook full of all these songs. And essentially, it's the rhythms, it's the clanking of these metal ships on the sea, the drones of the engines. It all lends itself so beautifully to a backdrop of some kind of music, as well as, like you say, it's a way to pass time on a sea trip by singing and, you know, sharing songs, probably not with each other anymore, but I could play in my cabin and essentially send those recordings to my husband or family. I'd say, oh, I passed this part of the world and I wrote this song about it. And, you know, it was a way of kind of sharing that story about my time at sea.
And it's a lovely idea. I guess unless you've spent time on a boat for any length of time, you won't realise that there are noises and rhythms and, you know, whether it's the anchor side hitting the boat, all sorts of things that you, if you concentrate enough, you'll pick up.
Yeah, and it's really funny because no one told me as a cadet for my first sea trip that I should have travelled with a pack of blue tack or toothpicks. And luckily the captain had thought, oh, if we've got a cadet joining, I'll get this for her because she won't know. And essentially things rattle and move in your cabin constantly. And you'll see when you go into a cabin, spaces plugged with blue tack and toothpicks to essentially stop the rattling so that you can quiet the cabin. And you'll also have loose bolts in the deck heads and things. And some of the crew have told me that they think the shipbuilders put them in loose bolts places so that it's like a joke so that the seafarers will be tormented by the rolling nuts and bolts. I don't know if anyone would be so cruel to actually think of doing that in the shipbuilder's yard, but it's still a funny commentary that the seafarers have come up with.
That's a great idea, that we're going to torment the people that are going to spend their time on this boat just by making it a little bit less tight. So, and did you have a background in music before you went to sea? Did you know about the songs and the kind of history before then, or is it something that you've learnt alongside your time at the Navy?
Yeah, so I was probably not I mean, obviously I'm not really your stereotypical seafarer that comes from a seafaring background. Like the sole reason I went to sea is because I was totally in love with oil tankers from the age of 8, and it was kind of, I just loved the way they looked. And then I also got really interested in Scottish traditional music. I started singing a cappella when I was a teenager, and I was performing music as a trio with Lauren McCall and Ewan McPherson, playing mostly trad stuff. So traditional songs are heavily influenced by the 1960s folk revival. And so we essentially released a little album back then. And I don't tend to cite that, but that was kind of what I was doing as a teenager just before I left school and when I left school. And I did it for a few years, but I just found that I thought the future as a musician was so insecure that I really was thinking what I could do. And I also felt like I needed more life experience to just make me feel more confident about sharing all these ancient stories when I didn't have a story of my own. And I kept coming back to the idea of a career at sea. And of course, most of the ballads that I really loved, I just absolutely love Fairport Convention's A Sailor's Life. Well, most of them end in tragedy, but I still was so attracted to the idea of going to sea that I just needed to go and do it. And I think in the past, things like As Sylvia Was Walking, it's all about how a girl is left behind and her husband or someone's gone to sea, and how they have to dress up as a man to go. I just thought that in this day and age, you don't have to do that. You can go to sea and actually experience it. So the romantic side of me painted this picture of what it would be like to go to sea and how it was something that I really needed to do. And I think that probably, I probably am quite a romantic seafarer writing songs in my cabin, whereas the rest of them are drinking beer. you know. But I'm still really glad I did it. And actually, what I really realized that in the Merchant Navy was that most people on board, they're very accepting of each other.
Right.
So you might have differences, but you have to work with people for 4 months at a time, you know, so you have to just put up with people's eccentricities. So even though I stood out like a sore thumb, it was okay because I was still part of the team. And I think on shore side, it can actually be quite lonely because you can actually be ostracized from the community, I guess, because if you live on your own and you're counted as slightly odd or eccentric, like myself, you might not. You have to meet kindred spirits to actually have a community, you know. Whereas at sea, you just have the crew, and that's who you're living with. So I do miss the camaraderie, I guess, of being at sea.
It's so method, Chloe. Most people would say, I'm interested in sea shanties, therefore I will stay where I am and listen to them and sing them. But you, no, I'm going to experience this. I do love that. And so did you think that experience really kind of gave you life experience that then you could feel, I can write about this about myself and my own experiences?
Yeah, I think for me, I actually turned my back on music when I went to sea, thinking that I was just going to close the chapter for a while and maybe come back to it when I'm older for fun. And then what happened was that these songs, like I said, the sounds of the ship I found so inspiring, and the exposure to the natural world, the songs just pushed their way into my mind. So I wrote them down. And then likewise, shore life is actually quite lonely as a seafarer because obviously your work colleagues are all on ship. You might not necessarily live local to them when you are actually on shore leave. So I found myself with swathes of weeks on end, months on shore, with time to kill doing things. And for me, that wasn't really a problem because I just entertained myself making harp arrangements, writing songs, and I had a horse at the time, so I would ride through the countryside and swim in the sea, and that was a really good way of kind of spending my time. And I think that was essentially, I didn't plan to do anything with the songs, but then eventually I just felt like I needed to share this story because I realized how marginalized we are as seafarers. Like I'd often explain to people what job I did. They'd instantly say, oh, so you're a steward on the ships. And I'd be like, no, I drive the ships. You know, I am a navigator. And they didn't know that job existed. So it was something that I really felt needs to be brought to the forefront of society's mind, is because, you know, a lot of the cargoes and things, like we play quite a big part in civilization. You know, the
Yeah.
merchant navy is quite a big part of bringing stores to other countries. Also, a few times we sailed up to island communities on our coastal tankers, bringing oil. And you know, sometimes they were running very low, and it was like emergency contracts that we were taking to bring stuff out to the Hebrides or the Orkney, or you know, these islands that are quite remote. And I think that sailing around that landscape and seeing Scotland from an entirely new perspective after living on shore was really, really special. And I really want to share that with, I guess, people who might not necessarily be able to go to sea like I managed to do. And I think that this music it's become an agenda of mine as opposed to just me needing to share my songs. It's become something that I feel quite strongly about, sharing the stories. And actually, with that in mind, I'm also writing at the moment. I guess it's leaning more towards theatre now because I have all these tales and anecdotes that come between my songs. Because every song does have a backstory to it of my time at sea or personal experience. And I'm essentially writing this more of a theatre-led piece that will focus on the storytelling as much as the music.
And that it's one of the reasons, or perhaps the reason, that the tales like the Silkies and the songs that you're talking about are so strong in the west coast of Scotland, is because these communities did rely on boats bringing them, you know, even historically taking them food and oil and supplies and many of those things.
Yeah, so one of the things that attracted me up to Greenock area, because I actually live in Wemyss Bay now, and I have done for the last 5 years. it was the history, the maritime history here, and the fact that we live on the Clyde coast, the beautiful scenery that we've got, but also the shipping comes and goes. Like,
Yeah.
a day doesn't go by where I'm not seeing one of, a cruise ship, an oil tanker, cargo ships. Sometimes I see my old ships come in, and there's just this feeling of continuity. I think living shoreside was a big step for me
Yeah.
when I went on maternity leave, and I bridged the gap by living here on the Clyde coast to feel close to the shipping.
And going back to the Silkie of Sulskerry, there's a lovely video to accompany it. It's very kind of atmospheric. And what was it like to shoot? Because I'm going to guess it looks fantastic, but it might have been a bit more uncomfortable than it might look in the final version.
Yeah, well, I had to do everything on a shoestring because this one was kind of an unexpected single that I knew I should bring together. I just felt it all aligned to release something for Cambridge folk. And I filmed it myself on my GoPro and I edited it myself. So I'm glad that you like it and you
Oh,
think it's
really lovely.
atmospheric. Thank you so much. So it was on my local beach, and it's actually where there's a seal colony. And at first I wanted to get them in, but they didn't really show up very well. But the actual filming, there was this glorious 5 days in a row of sunny weather here. And my equipment only arrived on the last day of that 5-day window. So I had to rush down to my local beach. I think my daughter was napping in the car. And so my husband was supposed to be able to help me a wee bit, but he obviously had to stay and supervise. So I ended up setting up all my equipment on the beach and feeling a bit like an idiot because there was other people on the beach and there I was in this red dress, posing and waving my arms around to get this music video. So it was good, but you might also notice, especially in, I do a kind of sped up incoming tide shot, you might notice these tiny black specks, and it's the midges, because that's what you get on the west coast of Scotland. So,
of course it is.
Yeah, and the water was cold, like it was cold. I do go swimming every day, but I don't usually just stand with my feet in there for like a couple of hours filming stuff. But it was actually the day that a humpback whale swam up Clyde. I don't know if you heard about it, but it was breaching around Dunoon. And apparently the day that I was filming was the day that it swam out. So apparently an hour before I filmed that, it had swam past Lunderston Bay, and I was just down the coast from that. So I wasn't sure if I would see it or not. But obviously I didn't catch it on camera, but it was really a nice idea thinking that I was standing in the water while a big whale was really close by.
So yeah, the seals don't show up, but the midges do. That sounds about right on the west coast of Scotland. And you mentioned playing live. You're playing at Cambridge. Unfortunately, this is going out on Sunday night, so we'll have missed that. But however, do you have other live dates planned coming up?
Yeah, so I'm playing ADF Festival on the 29th. Again, that's before it comes out on Sunday. But then I'm also playing at Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So I'm playing at the Acoustic Music Centre on the 18th and 19th. And I am also playing at Hartlepool Folk Festival in October. I'm playing in Leeds and also at Doncaster, and I think also somewhere in Carlisle, just near Carlisle, later in the year. So there's a few gigs, but the main Scottish one that's coming up is the Acoustic Music Centre on the 18th and 19th for Edinburgh Fringe.
Well, hopefully I'll be in Edinburgh on those dates, so if I am, I will try and come along and catch you playing.
Well, let me know and I'll stick it on the door if that's the case.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Thank you very much. And aside from your live dates, what's next for you? Have you got any other future releases planned, or is it all about the Silkie for just now?
Yeah, so I'm actually hoping to get funding to record another single this summer, which is about escaping the city's heat and going out to the Hebrides. So I'm quite excited about that. If I can get the funding to go ahead, that would be great. But I also am, like I said, writing this theatre piece, and I'm hoping to collaborate with a choreographer called Ballet Folk. So we're going to be doing this whole theatre piece. As well as that, I'm potentially starting to explore archive recordings and doing something quite interesting with those later. That'll probably be towards the end of 2024. But yeah, there's plenty to keep me busy, and I'll also be just constantly picking up gigs as and when I can get them. So yeah.
And there's a line at the bottom of your biography, and it got me wondering whether it was there just to check people read to the very end, because it says Chloe lives on her family-run alpaca trekking and goat yoga centre. Now, is that true, or is that just to check that people have read the whole thing?
Yeah, it's true. When I moved shoreside, it didn't have the wow factor, the same wow factor of, being at sea. So I began to struggle with the mundane shore life. And so I ended up getting some alpacas about a year after I settled shoreside. And then we've recently got these pygmy goats. So if anyone is in Inverclyde area, we offer alpaca trekking at Inverkip, and we also offer goat treks and yoga at Kelburn Castle. So if you are in the area, so please look up our website. It's called West Coast Alpacas, or just message me on my music page and say that you're interested in the alpacas or goats, and I'll understand. And I'll give you the information about the animals, because I think everyone loves goats and alpacas.
Well, Chloe, I have never ended an interview like that, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much.
And this is Chloe Matharu and Clyde Islands.